It is exactly 8:16 a.m. Welcome back to the show, and we now cross over to the UK, Scotland to be precise. And we're going to be talking to Yvonne Ridley. She's a British journalist and author, and we're going to be talking about the new caretaker government that is going to be led by Mohammed Hassan Akund. That is the Taliban government. What does it mean when they say caretaker government? And let's look at the few key figures that have already been announced as ministerial positions. Yvonne, salaam alaikum. Welcome to the program.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for asking me.
Okay, lovely to have you on the show as always. And why do they refer to it as a caretaker government? Is it fluid? Are they going to make changes as and when the need arises?
Well, that was the only good news I would say that we can take out of this government. The fact that it's an interim or caretaker government, which suggests it's temporary. And as I say, that's the only real positive that I can take at it from an outsider looking in, because the ranks are filled with Taliban, all men, no women, no ethnic minority representation, not at all what the world was led to believe when that extraordinary press conference was made in Kabul. So, as I say, the only source of comfort anyone looking from the outside in would take from that is that it is a caretaker government. So how long it's going to last, I don't know.
Afghanistan is very close to your heart. We all know it. Alhamdulillah, you've even written a book, I think, around Afghanistan. Yes, I am right.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you've been watching the progress, you're watching everything as it's been happening very, very closely. Um, I'm also saddened uh, to hear that minority groups have not been included. But as you say, it's fluid. It is open to change, or so we
Mm-hmm.
hope. What do
Mm-hmm.
you believe are the challenges? And undoubtedly, the Western world is really watching, waiting, and they're going to then pounce on Afghanistan because their conditions possibly will not be met. The other big issue, which is really very disheartening, is, and your doggy wants some attention there. The other bit of news which is very disheartening is we know that Afghanistan is very dependent on foreign aid. This doesn't bode well for foreign aid coming in.
Well, that's right. About 80% of Afghans' budget comes from the global community. And of course, the West is bound to make sounds about the structure of this caretaker government, not least of all because the key post of Interior Minister was Sirajuddin Haqqani, who is on the FBI's most wanted list with
Oh,
a
yes.
£5 million bounty on his head. And I don't know how true it is, but he's supposed to, or the Haqqani network is still believed to be holding an American hostage. So the fact that a member of this, as a senior member of this family, has this key post of Interior Minister, is bound to set alarm bells ringing in Washington. So it's a very strange decision. I'm sure that there'll be a press conference coming, hopefully, in which the Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid can at least explain the structure, the reasoning behind it, and as I say, I'm just so disappointed not to see any female representation, because it's not as though there isn't a there's no shortage of amazing women candidates out there.
Coming from you, I must say, disheartens me as well, because I
Yes.
know how pro-Afghani you have been all the years, going back 20 odd years. Let's look at, apart from the Western world, let's look at the other challenges. We know that the women have taken to the streets. I haven't watched that very closely, but I'd like to think that there wasn't any violence against these women. Does that send out a strong message, a signal that at least we as women are able to take the streets in protest?
Yes, it is. I mean, these are remarkably strong women, brave, courageous women. They've gone out onto the streets, publicly demonstrated. And of course, you've got to remember that the Taliban security, up until a few weeks ago, were fighting. They've had no training on civilian crowd control. So we should be thankful at this stage that they have shown so much restraint. They have fired over the heads of the protesters. Let's face it, trying to contain crowds in any country is never a good look. The French use tear gas, the Israelis use live rounds into the crowds, not over the heads. In Britain, we've seen it certainly in Northern Ireland, the use of rubber bullets, and it's just not a good look at all. There's no easy way of doing it. So I suppose we should be grateful that the women are still out there on the streets, vocally protesting, and mercifully in Kabul anyway, nobody has been injured, although there were reports that a similar demonstration in Herat, there were problems. But again, that's unsubstantiated at the moment. This is the trouble. The journalists are out there, but we're getting all sorts of mixed reports, and we're getting a lot of fake news. And
Absolutely.
one of the biggest offenders is India. Their media is just out of control in some sectors. We got pictures of F-16 fighter jets in action over the Panjshir province, and it turned out that those photographs and footage were genuine F-16 fighter jets, but they were on a training exercise in Wales, for goodness sake. So, why they're regurgitating library footage and saying, oh, this is happening. Similarly with some footage of drones in action in the Panjshir Valley, which the Indian media said this came from, these are Pakistan drones, and some teenage kids who play Xbox style games just said, no, that's footage from a video game. So, this nonsense and this fake news has got to stop, because it's just so difficult when something serious does happen.
I'm going to try and keep you here a little longer, because there's so much important information we need to get from you. I know last week you were on, my colleague Mariam Mia interviewed you with a sister from Afghanistan. She was one of those females who gave an explanation as to why they choose to remain in Afghanistan. Do you think the picture has changed very much since last week? Question number one. Question number two, I should imagine the picture is very different for rural women. I mean, it was very encouraging seeing those women taking to the streets in Kabul, but obviously it's pretty different in the rural areas.
Well, life is very harsh for Afghan women, especially in the rural areas where the problems are presented more by the patriarchy and the culture than the Taliban. You know, for those women, it doesn't really make much difference who's in charge and who's in power. They're still being denied their human rights, basic human rights. They're still being denied a proper education. And so it is quite tough. But the woman that Sister Mariam had on her show was quite extraordinary. She could have gone out quite easily. She could still go out now. She has a Canadian passport, dual nationality. She fled with her family and ended up in Canada from Afghanistan during one of the regimes where it wasn't safe for the family to remain. She returned in 2017. She's running an amazing campaign saying, please stay, to other Afghan women. And, you know, because there is a brain drain. And that's really sad. Hopefully it will come the other way, but not while the Taliban have got this all-male hardline lineup of men. As I say, the one comfort we can take from it is it's called the interim government.
Absolutely. So, Yvonne, you spoke about the brain drain, which I was going to touch on. Added to that is the economic migrant situation that Afghanistan is going to face as well. And then, of course, the refugee crisis that probably will then follow on to other parts of the world. Clearly, a lot of countries are saying they cannot take in any more refugees. Pakistan is sitting already with 3 million refugees. What's going to happen in that space? I know South Africa has refused 126 interim refugees as well. And I can understand the reasoning behind it because we are flooded in our country as well with African migrants in our country. But that's a totally different story. How do you see all of this playing out?
Well, just this week, migrants crossed the English Channel from France into Britain in their hundreds. You know, it's starting already. But the West can take in refugees. You've just mentioned Pakistan. Iran is another country which has says it's reaching saturation point. Turkey has taken in millions of Syrian refugees. You know, there are a lot of Muslim countries out there who are right in the front line and providing care for refugees from various conflicts around the world, including the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. So for the West to turn around and say, well, you know, we'll take 5,000 here and 5,000, it's ridiculous. A lot of the problems have been caused by the West, and it's time that the West stood up and shouldered its responsibilities more than it has done. I mean, in this evacuation that we saw from Kabul in recent weeks, it was horrendous. And, you know, they acknowledged, Britain, America, and some of the other European countries acknowledged that they had left behind hundreds. Now, that isn't acceptable either. It's not as though they were caught on the hop. Well, they were surprised by the Taliban advance through the country. But, you know, as far back as February 29 last year, when the Doha Agreement was signed, they knew that the clock was ticking. And instead of progressing and getting all of these people out with the correct paperwork, they dragged their heels, and now they're in an embarrassing situation where people who had served Britain, America, and other European countries and NATO forces, they're now in this situation where these people feel imperiled.
Just on the flip side of the responsibility of the West and other countries, I know that certain African countries have also taken in refugees, but there are situations where a country cannot, they just can't, they're bursting at the seams. I think we need to also take that into account. That's a factor that needs to be recognized, because in most cases, if these are economic migrants, they are going to be ending up as being cheap labor for the country concerned. That's the one issue. And then these the refugees passage is being paid by certain Western countries, and also America has created this mess 20 years ago by invading Afghanistan. They created the mess. They occupied the country for 20 years. They've left it in the situation that it's in now. Should they not be taking responsibility for the refugees?
Well, of course, they should be stepping up to the plate more. And unfortunately, the reality is they're not. And listening to Mariam's guest from Afghanistan last week, she said that the reason that there was such a deluge of people wanting to flee the country at the airport, a lot of those people didn't have papers, but there were rumors going round that there's free flights out to America, you'll get a house and a maid service, which is
Fake
crazy.
news. Fake news
Again,
once again. Yes.
fake news.
Mhm.
And people just don't have the luxury of a maid service in the
Absolutely.
West because labor is so expensive. And there's they were lied to. And again, this whole fake news, all it does is create hysteria, chaos. And then we saw the horrific scenes when that plane went down the runway and people were desperately clinging to its wings.
Unnecessarily lives were lost in
Yes.
that terrible deluge. Um, let's look at the challenges as far as the Taliban and their obviously caretaker government is facing, and where and how does ISIS come into the picture, because they are somewhat at loggerheads with each other. I'm also thinking about those Taliban fighters or members that don't get absorbed into the government, or do not get possibly what they were hoping to get as far as the new government is concerned. They could actually defect to ISIS-K, could they not? And does that also then mean that we might have a groundswell of ISIS or other extremist groups?
Well, it is alarming, the development of ISIS Khorasan, but I think that that would be quite a leap for a Taliban soldier who is committed to the ideology of the Taliban to switch to ISIS-K. Because the ideology of ISIS, apart from it not being Islamic, is also,
Can you qualify that, please, when you say apart from it not being Islamic? Let's understand it. Let's just clarify what we mean by that.
Well, ISIS is and has proven to be a bunch of criminal thugs. Their rape of the Yazidi women in Iraq, their holding slave markets in Raqqa, their beheading and limb chopping of people. That is just not Islamic at all.
Absolutely.
They were completely out of Islam, and their behavior really shocked the Taliban, which is conservative with a small c and quite puritanical. And so the gang rapes, the sexual abuse of women, the slave trade, they were horrified by it. And so I would have, gosh, this dog's going crazy.
Okay, Yvonne, we'll have to leave it. We'll have to leave it there. I have run out of time. But as always, wonderful talking with you. I'm sure we'll have many more conversations in the future. You go well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
That was Yvonne Ridley. She's a British journalist and author talking to us about the new caretaker government announced by the Taliban. 9:37 exactly. And standing by to talk with us is Sami Amin Al Ariyan. Obviously, we're going to talk 9/11.